Omar Khadr and the consensus media, that is the topic of tonight's byline. Omar Khadr won't be home for the holidays. I know some of you are crying at this news, others are laughing hysterically, and some are cheering. But this statement I just made is the actual lead line of a Globe and Mail story on Canada's most famous terrorist. The Globe goes on. Instead, the convicted Canadian terrorist, who many regard as a victim, a child soldier, not a murderer, will spend his 10th New Year's imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay. Now let me be clear. Khadr was not a victim, hardly a child, and certainly a murderer. Here's a video obtained by 60 Minutes showing how Khadr chose to spend some of his time in Afghanistan.
Evidence like the images on this videotape found in the rubble after Khadr was captured. The man in the middle is teaching the other men how to attach detonation wires to landmines. On the left is a young man who appears to be Omar Khadr, helping put together a firing device. Later in the videotape, you can see the landmines being planted in the ground in the dark, most likely aimed at American soldiers.
Remember, Omar Khadr won't be home for the holidays. I know some of you are thinking, so what? What do I care about Khadr? But I want you to think about the media here and what's going on. They want you to know that Omar won't be home for the holidays. What holidays would those be? Would that be Hanukkah, the Jewish holiday currently ongoing that Khadr, as a Muslim, surely wouldn't celebrate? Would it be Christmas, the Christian holiday he also wouldn't celebrate? Or are we talking about the truly pagan holiday of New Year's Eve? The Globe is trying to pull at your heartstrings by pointing out that Khadr won't be home in Canada in time to celebrate holidays he likely doesn't celebrate at all. Oh wait, they do say there's a Muslim holiday in February that he might miss. The Globe goes on. Mr. Khadr also seems certain to spend Mawlid an-Nabi, the February 4th, 2012 Sunni observance of the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad, still in Guantanamo, more than 3 months after he was eligible for repatriation to a Canadian prison. The entire article portrays a young man who should be in Canada, but is kept out by a government that doesn't want him. For most of the article, you wouldn't really know what Omar, a convicted terrorist, murderer, and enemy of our ally and our way of life, has done. They don't really say until the piece is almost done and most people have stopped reading. I'm not surprised at this, though, since it fits a pattern laid out and described by CSIS Director Richard Fadden in a speech a while back where he pointed out that people accused of terrorism in Canada get a free ride from much of the media, despite their attempts to tear apart our liberal democratic system. Fadden said, "So why then, I ask, are those accused of terrorist offences often portrayed in media as quasi-folk heroes, despite the harsh statements of numerous judges? Why are they always photographed with their children, given tender-hearted profiles, and more or less taken at their word when they accuse CSIS or other government agencies of abusing them?" Those are good questions. I don't have answers. Although at times I believe this is the result of decades of a culture that rejects any kind of authority other than liberal judges hell-bent on overturning laws. Now, if the police or government say something is true, then it must be false. We can expect a lot more stories like this in coming months, and we can expect the drums to bang louder until Khadr is safely home in Canada being feted by some of the media. Perhaps by this time next year, he'll even have his own Christmas special. Khadr is coming back to Canada at some point. That doesn't mean we have to celebrate. And that doesn't mean crying tears that this convicted terrorist will spend another Christmas in jail. And that's the byline. Joining me now for more on Omar Khadr is Ezra Levant, author of a forthcoming book on that very man himself, Omar Khadr, Canada's most famous terrorist. Ezra, it always amazes me when people say, you know what, this is exactly what the media does and the problem with the media, and then the media falls into doing exactly what they're criticized of. In this case, soft-hearted portrayal, poor Omar won't be home for the holidays. Did it knock your socks off seeing that this morning?
Oh, it's part of a pattern. In fact, my forthcoming book is called The Enemy Within: Terror, Lies, and the Whitewashing of Omar Khadr. And let me tell you why we chose that title. The book is, it's about this little terrorist, this murderer, this Jew hater, this poisoner, this spy, this assassin. Yeah, it's about him and about the man he killed and the men he injured, yes. But it's much more than that. It's about the entire Canadian establishment, Brian, who has tried to turn him not only into a hero, but into a weapon against CSIS, against the Canadian forces, against Stephen Harper, against George W. Bush, against the United States of America. Omar Khadr is a bastard who should rot in hell. He's a murderer. I won't call him a psychopath because that excuses him. He's not crazy. He's just evil. But the worst evil was done by, for example, the Canadian Bar Association, which put out more than 250 press releases and other statements calling for Omar Khadr's freedom. More than they put for Nelson Mandela and, 10 other real heroes combined. It's a criticism of the Toronto Star, which is basically a PR agency. I spoke to the chief psychiatrist for the prosecutor who helped convict Khadr, who talked to Khadr for 2 days, sat with him and interviewed him for 2 full days. This chief prosecution psychiatrist says that Omar Khadr looks at the newspapers, looks at the CBC, looks at the Toronto Star as al-Qaeda assets. He regards them as instruments in the war against the West. But they were willing instruments, Brian. Our federal court of appeal, they were willing and complicit. They wanted Omar Khadr as a weapon to destroy our military, our security services, our police, our rule of law, and frankly, anyone conservative enough to want to stand up for Canada.
When the Supreme Court issued their ruling saying, look, Omar Khadr's rights have been violated, you've got to come up with a remedy, they didn't say you've got to bring him home. But they said, hey, and you know what? He's born in Canada. I might think he's a Canadian of convenience, but I'll applaud the court for this. They stayed out of foreign policy. They didn't tell the Harper government or any government what to do in foreign policy, which I had expected them to do. I expected them to cross that line because courts don't normally do that. But instead they just said, his rights have been violated. Canada was complicit in that. You've got to help find a remedy. A lot of people said, why won't you bring him home? That was the refrain from the reporters covering that and covering the government's reaction. It was like he had his own PR department here. They had decided what the truth was. They were going to be judge and jury all along. Do we have a fifth column on things like this? Are people naive? Why does this happen?
Some of it's naivete. I mean, my favorite column was by Judy Rebick, the left-wing feminist Jew, who called Omar Khadr a true hero. Well, Omar Khadr kills people like Judy Rebick. She's a woman who doesn't wear a burqa. She's a feminist. She's a Jew. I mean, those are 3 things Omar Khadr hates. The first word that Omar Khadr said when he was captured was actually F you. That's the first thing he did when the Americans captured him. He swore at him. And then the second thing he said is, kill me now. I want to go to heaven because I'm a martyr. Because he had just murdered an American. I mean, and in the 8 or so years he's been in Guantanamo Bay, he has not reformed. He has not repented. And at his sentencing hearing, he did not express any regret. The only thing he said is to the widow, I'm sorry, he didn't regret murdering Christopher Speer. He just regretted that it caused her some inconvenience. He's never showed contrition. He's actually become much more fundamentalist in Guantanamo Bay. He's the youngest prisoner there, but he actually leads the religious services because he's sort of like the godfather in this mafia crime family. Remember, his dad was an associate of bin Laden's. But to actually kill an American soldier, that makes him sort of the top of the pecking order at Guantanamo. Remember, a lot of people there, they were terrorists and schmucks and riffraff, but this was a Canadian-born, English-speaking, highly trained in espionage and poisons and assembling explosives, highly trained guy who actually achieved the highest heights, which is murdering an American. So he's a bit of a rock star at Guantanamo Bay. All the other prisoners treat him as this young leader. He's sort of like in the Godfather movie when Vito Corleone hands it over to Michael Corleone. He's the up-and-coming rising star in Al-Qaeda, and he's coming back to Canada, Brian.
Well, I think he's going to be a rock star to some people when he gets back here. That's unfortunate. Ezra, we'll have you on when your book is out to tell us more about it and tell us more about Omar Khadr. Thanks so much today, sir.
Thanks, my friend. Bye-bye.